Nobody this season has the ability to change the narrative surrounding themselves and their program quite like James Franklin. And James Franklin has done a really superb job through the first 2 months of the college football season in changing. I guess you could maybe argue he hasn't necessarily 100% changed that narrative, but Penn State is undefeated. They are 7-0, and they've got wins over Illinois and West Virginia and USC and Wisconsin. And while on the surface that might not seem as if it's some gigantic accomplishment, they come into a game against Ohio State at home ranked above the Buckeyes. And if you had told a Penn State fan or a college football observer that that was going to be the case the first Saturday in November, that Penn State would be ranked above Ohio State, that Penn State would be the one that's undefeated, that Penn State is the one that has the upper hand in the race for the Big Ten, all of those attributes, all of those qualities, I don't know that there are many people who would have believed you, but that is the case. And so they've taken care of business up to this point when Ohio State hasn't, when Georgia hasn't, Texas hasn't, Alabama hasn't, Notre Dame hasn't. Penn State deserves a lot of credit to this point. But these are the games that define people, define legacies, define careers. People remember whether you won the top five versus top five matchup, or you won the conference championship, or you made the college football playoff. And I've made this case before on the podcast. And if you are so inclined and you're a first time viewer, go back and nobody benefits more from an expanded college football playoff than a team like Penn State, who in the past had to play Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State every single year just to get the chance to go to their conference championship game, just to have a shot at the college football playoff. Now, Penn State doesn't have to go 12-0 or 11-1 every single year to have a chance to make the college football playoff because that was a tall task. And I think it's important to note that when you look back in the history of the sport, that for a really long time, teams that got to set their own schedules that were playing as independents every year, you see them start to come back down to earth when they get in a conference, right? Like Penn State, during their time in the Big Ten, has not been the juggernaut that Penn State was under Joe Paterno when they played as an independent. And the same goes for Miami and Florida State and West Virginia and BYU. Schools that got to set their own schedules, that got to choose what games they were playing because they were not in a conference, were obviously at a huge advantage compared to, especially now today, but compared to even 20 years ago. Teams that got to choose who they played did better. It's not an outlandish thing to see that correlation, but it is important to know that, like, hey, when you're used to 30 or 40 years of stupid success and then you become just another run of the mill program or an upper echelon program at a conference. And so Penn State fans, Penn State boosters, the athletic department have had to deal with that, that they have not been to the level that their expectations are. And I would argue that James Franklin has consistently had Penn State to what their expectations should be, that their expectations should be win 9 to 10 games every year, not win 12 games every year, be the Big Ten champion, be in the college football play. I think being in the college football playoff every year or being a college football playoff first four out program every year are fair expectations for Penn State. But when you've been somewhere for a decent amount of time, there gets to be a little bit of an unrest that when you feel like you are plateauing, that's a bad spot to be in. For instance, Kentucky. probably feels like they are plateauing right now, where Mark Stoops has gotten them to as high as they're ever going to get to. Now, the downside of making a change is you could very well crater back to where you should have been, could have been, if not for a really good football coach. Penn State, if they hire the wrong person, should they decide we can do better than James Franklin, you could really quickly become also ran a forgotten program. But James Franklin can 100% change the narrative because the narrative is Penn State hasn't been good enough. James Franklin has not lived up to the expectations. James Franklin has not lived up to the hype his teams have had, and they have never gotten over the hump of where they were a national title contender. And if they win on Saturday against Ohio State, I'm here to tell you that the expectations and the views will be that James Franklin has a really good football team in his midst and that they have a national championship caliber program in 2024, especially in a year where there is not that dominant top dog that everybody views as you're going to have to beat team insert here to win the title. I don't think that exists this year, which is sort of a blessing and a curse for James Franklin because if you do win on Saturday, then the eyes of your fan base start to get real big, right? The eyes of your administration, your athletic director, your boosters, they all go, holy cow, we beat Ohio State at home at a big noon kickoff. We are now one of the top two or three ranked programs in America. They're already ranked number three. That you can say, we got a chance to bring home a gold trophy. And if you don't, then that narrative reverts back to what it was before. And that's the thing that I think stinks sometimes is like, and I've mentioned this before with like Ryan Day or Bob Stoops, right? That the idea is that they don't win big games. Peyton Manning, as a quarterback in the NFL, he doesn't win big games. Like if you lost the Super Bowl, well, he doesn't win big games. Well, an NFL playoff game is a big game. Penn State won a Big Ten title under James Franklin. The Big Ten championship game is a big game. If they beat a top five ranked Ohio State team on Saturday, regardless of what Ohio State does the rest of the season, Penn State has won a big game. Generally, that big game moniker, they don't win big games. When they do win big games, it reverts to, well, that wasn't a big game. Yeah, it is. Saturday for Penn State and for Ohio State too, make no mistake about it, it's a big game. But for Penn State, it's a gigantic game. It is a chance for James Franklin to show whether or not he's one of the best coaches in the sport. And if they win, there's going to be a lot of hoopla surrounding the Nittany Lions. The alternative is if they lose, the questions persist. And when the questions persist and the questions get louder, when people start to ask the question more and more and more. I used to, in my sports talk radio career, I used to talk about this with Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns a lot. Like it was, if you continue to have to ask, is Baker Mayfield worthy of a fifth year option or worthy of a $200 million contract? If you have to keep asking the question, the answer is probably not yes. And so, if the question persists, is James Franklin going to get Penn State over the hump? Is James Franklin going to lead the Nittany Lions to a Big Ten title or a national championship? Can he get them where they want to be? The more you ask the question, the less likely that it is that the answer is yes. So, Saturday could not be a bigger game for James Franklin. And I think all of the pressure lies with the Nittany Lions. You could argue that the pressure rests with Ohio State because a second loss puts them firmly on the bubble of the college football playoff. And then you have questions for Ryan Day that is the different discussion for a different day. But if Ohio State loses, their losses are to two of the top three ranked teams in America. As we've known and seen from the SEC, a bad loss is, or a good loss is better than a bad win. But for Penn State, it's at home. You're higher ranked. People have questioned for a long time whether you're going to get to where you say you're going to get to. I think all the pressure rests with the Nittany Lions, and I'm interested to see how that all shakes out and how you operate when you know that maybe the expectations are that you're supposed to win, that you are the hunted rather than the hunter, so to speak. Some teams don't handle that well. I mentioned on Sunday that like Oregon deserves a ton of credit because when you're the number one team in the country, you're going to get everybody's best shot, and they handled Illinois with no problems. I'm interested to see how Penn State handles being viewed as we're the ones who should be beating Ohio State and not the other way around. It'll be a really interesting game on Saturday, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think Penn State beats Ohio State? You think the Buckeyes leave Happy Valley with a big win? Would love to hear your comments. Let's have that conversation in the comments below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on a podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.